Hi everyone, Michael Smith here. As a former engineer and statistician turned numerologist, I'm fascinated with numbers from many angles, but especially how they relate to mathematical and energetic cycles. As the circle is the most fundamental way of describing any cycle, the most basic way of describing a cycle is by the number known as pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. In this video, we're going to look at the enigmatic number pi from a variety of different perspectives, not just in its conventional form as a ratio of the physical dimensions of a circle. As we'll discover, there's a number of ways of slicing pi, some more rational than others. Let's begin by illustrating what pi represents. It's the ratio of a circle's circumference or perimeter length, the curved orange arrow here, to its diameter or width, the straight blue arrow that spans across it. And when we divide those two lengths, we get a value for pi of 3.1415926, etc., an infinitely non-repeating decimal number which is called irrational number. What this basically tells us is that the circumference of a circle is a little more than 3 times its diameter, but also that pi is a constant for a circle of any size. It's therefore a universal constant which applies to any circular geometry or cycle, which makes it extremely useful in math and science. However, being an irrational number, pi is also quite awkward to work with. It complicates mathematical calculations and gives only approximate answers depending on how many digits of pi you use. This always bothered me about pi, that such a fundamental ratio of nature could be such an obscure and imprecise number. Intuitively, I believe that all fundamental properties of nature should have simple rational values, just like the basic concepts they reflect. But more on that later. To help remedy this, the circle can also be described in terms of angles of rotation using units of radians. A radian is basically the angle swept out or subtended by the portion of a circle's circumference equal to its radius. This lets us describe the circle as a rotational cycle instead of just a static shape, and pi as a 180-degree half rotation of that cycle. As such, a full circle represents 2 pi radians or 2 180-degree half rotations, which you could say is sort of rational in terms of there being 2 half cycles rather than 3.14159 diameters, but still technically irrational being a multiple of pi. Now there's an alternative to pi called tau, which is equal to 2 pi. Although not formally recognized in mainstream math, it's been suggested as a more logical alternative to pi because it gets rid of the factor of 2 when describing a full cycle. However, as we'll see, it's this very factor of 2 inherent to the polarity of the circle which best describes cycles. Now, instead of describing pi in terms of linear lengths of circumference to diameter, another way would be to describe it in terms of rotational positions. Here I've shown the circle according to the traditional base 10 number cycle, the base 10 or decimal system pretty much used as a standard worldwide. This represents the circle as a cycle of 10 positions from 0 to 9, with all larger numbers generated by repetitions of that same cycle. So instead of pi as the ratio of circumference to diameter, it becomes the ratio of cycle to polarity, where the diameter or width of the circle is now the number of positions from one side of the circle to the opposite side, rather than a linear length. Not only does this replace linear dimensions of a physical circle with dimensionless positions of a generic cycle, it also makes pi equal to the rational whole number of 2, of the 2-to-1 ratio of 2 polarized half cycles per cycle. And like traditional pi, this base 10 positional version of pi is still a universal constant. However, one drawback to this version of pi is that base 10 is not actually very versatile as far as number systems go, with only 3 factors or ways of dividing itself, in half, in fifths, or in tenths. Another drawback is that this positional approach only describes the incremental positions of the cycle, but not their actual values. This brings us to the base 12 cycle, a much more versatile alternative to base 10. Where base 10 can only express itself 3 ways, base 12 can do so 5 ways, in half, thirds, quarters, sixths, and twelfths. So, although base 10 may seem easier to use on the surface, and works nicely with our 10 fingers, it comes at a cost of being less descriptive of natural cycles. Note here that I've underlined the numbers 10 and 11 to denote them as single digits in base 12, not to be confused with the double digit 10, which actually represents one complete cycle of 12 with 0 remainder. As such, our new and improved base 12 positional pi still equals the rational whole number 2, and still represents the same 2-to-1 ratio of 2 polarized half cycles per cycle, but is simply a more efficient and versatile way of describing a cycle than base 10. As such, base 12 addresses the versatility issue, but not the issue with the positional approach only describing incremental positions of the cycle, but not their values. So, to bring number values into the mix, we will now revisit pi in terms of an energetic cycle rather than just a positional one. This brings us to the idea of numbers not only as sequential positions within a cycle, but with sequential values, just like notes of a musical scale or colored frequencies of the spectrum of light. In other words, as a vibrational cycle of numerology. To go from positional base 12 to vibrational, our cycle essentially remains the same, except that the numbered positions now represent values or energies as well. And because they're energies of a vibrational cycle, they add together just like the frequencies of white light. So instead of the circumference of our positional cycle representing the sum of 12 incremental units for a numerical total of 12, this vibrational cycle represents the sum of the 12 values from 1 through 12. This sum comes to 78 in base 10, which in base 12 equals 66, essentially 6 cycles of 12 plus 6 remainder. Likewise, where the diameter of the positional cycle was the number of positions between opposite sides of the circle, that is, a half cycle of 6 positions, the diameter of our vibrational cycle now represents the energetic difference between the values of those two opposite positions, essentially a half cycle energetic potential of 6. So, although the diameter represents a half cycle of 6 in both cases, that 6 means very different things. A physical positional difference in one case versus an energetic difference or potential in the other. As such, our expression for pi as energy cycle per polarized potential becomes the ratio 66 divided by 6 in base 12. Now in numerology, every single digit number has a vibrational personality or theme with which it resonates. The number 6, for instance, resonates with the theme of love. Also, a double-digit number like 66 is called a master number, and basically represents the idea of mastering the energy of the single digits theme, both as a single experience of that frequency, basically of 6 alone, and as full cycles or octaves of that theme, of 6 times 12. So, the number 66 is all about mastering the theme of love in a vibrationally comprehensive way. Also, when a master number appears in a person's numerology chart, it's not normally reduced, that is, digits being added together to get a single digit theme. However, when a master number appears within a mathematical expression such as pi, the digits are reduced before completing the calculation. Thus, our expression for pi of 66 over 6 becomes 6 plus 6 over 6, or basically 1 cycle of 12 over 6. Thus, it is once again the 2-to-1 ratio of 2 half-cycle polarities of 6 per full cycle or octave of 12, or in terms of numerological themes, of seeing the duality of love in every experience. So, other than adding numerological meanings to the numbers, our ratio for pi here is the same as in positional base 12, of a rational 2-to-1 ratio of polarities per cycle. However, the big difference is that our cycle here is an energetic one. As such, our 2-to-1 ratio represents the fundamental nature of vibrations, of 2 polarized potentials per cycle, or 2 polarized amplitudes per wavelength. So, to sum up, the base 12 energy cycle of numerology seems to be the most meaningful expression of pi. It's a rational numbered ratio of 2-to-1 polarities per cycle, rather than an irrational ratio of circumference to diameter. It expresses dimensionless rotational positions of a universal cycle, rather than specific incremental lengths. It utilizes the highly versatile base 12 cycle, and it captures information about its positions, both as rotational increments and numerical values, both crucial to expressing a cycle as a vibration. And if you're on board with the idea of numbers having numerological meanings, we can find an even deeper relevance of pi, of seeing the duality of love in every experience, and how every experience represents a cycle of illumination, basically, through 12 vibrational themes, just like light. So, from the irrational and rational to downright numerological, there's much more than meets the eye with pi. And as with pi in general, it's simply a matter of taste which type you prefer. Thanks so much for watching.